always love to take a moment because this is one of my favorite days of the year. So thank you all for being here. I'm Joyce Kennedy. I'm with People and Pollinators Action Network and also on the steering committee for CPN. And you can see the name of our next session there for you. And just a few words, with the recent groundbreaking wins at this state level, including the release of the native pollinating insect study. It's going to give us a robust framework for pollinator protection, the passage of SB 241117, which grants new authority to manage invertebrates, which is really exciting. Yep, applause. And then also the establishment of a new biodiversity group at CPW. So that is going to uniquely position the state for more work in this realm. So we're really excited about that as well. And I'm going to give you brief introductions for this wonderful panel, but I encourage you to please look at your program for their full bios. So we have David Klute, Deputy Director for Species Conservation with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. He's been with CPW for 22 years, first as Bird Conservation Coordinator and then leading statewide species conservation programs. Haley Schroder joined CPW just last week. So she's the brand new invertebrate and rare plants supervisor. She earned her Ph.D. in entomology from Cornell University and has spent her career investigating the complex routes by which anthropogenic stressors influence insect communities. So thank you for making this one of your first official duties, Haley. We have Kacie Miller. She's the State Wildlife Action Plan, or SWAP, coordinator for CPW, and she enjoys bringing people together via conservation planning to facilitate ideas coming to fruition. And finally, we have David Anderson, the Director of Colorado Natural Heritage Program. And in this role, he coordinates programs and outreach and develops new projects. And he's now the principal investigator on the statewide Natural Heritage Survey. So again, we're going to have time for questions and discussion afterward. We'll bring them back up here for that. So think of your questions. We'll have note cards passed around once again. And thank you all for being here. And we're going to lead off with David Klute. Do you want this one?
I think I'll stick with this one.
Down advances.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Once again, my name's Dave Klute. I'm the Deputy Assistant Director for our Species Conservation Programs with CPW. Very excited to be here. I attended last year, my very first time, and I wasn't sure what to expect, and it was just amazing to see such a crowd of people, so much energy, and we've made such great strides over the past year. So I'm really excited to tell you about what we've accomplished so far and what we're moving towards in the very near future. So lots of stuff going on. Again, talking about advancing biodiversity and the state's commitment to that, both within Colorado Parks and Wildlife and the Colorado Natural Heritage Program. Once again, I'll be starting us off just giving a few words, some overview about CPW. Haley Schroder, again, she started on Tuesday. It's amazing. She brings a ton of energy, so excited to have her on board, and she's going to say a few words. Kacie Miller's going to provide some information about the State Wildlife Action Plan and where we're going with that and our 2025 revision. And then David Anderson's going to talk about the Colorado Natural Heritage Survey that CNHP is leading. And then we'll have time for questions at the end. So my outline, again, talking about CPW and biodiversity, giving some background about where CPW was 125 years ago and then where we are today. So some just historical context, looking at those biodiversity advancements we've made, and particularly looking at some of the legislative actions that have happened over the past few years. And then just some general thoughts about how we're thinking about implementing biodiversity in a more purposeful way. So with that, I'll move on. I just wanted to start with a little framing, talking about the mission of Parks and Wildlife. Parks and Wildlife is a merged agency. State Parks was separate from Colorado Division of Wildlife until I think it was about a dozen years ago the agencies merged. So we have a dual purpose, focused both on perpetuating wildlife resources, but also providing a quality state park system and supporting sustainable outdoor recreation, and doing that not just for today, but thinking about current and future generations to make sure these things persist sustainably into the future. Today, I'm really going to focus on that aspect of perpetuating wildlife resources and sort of what that means and how that context has changed through time. So with that, I just wanted to jump into just a little Venn diagramming here and thinking about where CPW is in terms of biodiversity. If we go back 125 years ago when the agency was formed, it really focused on terrestrial and aquatic wildlife, and by that I mean vertebrate wildlife for the most part. So birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and fish. And for the most part, that was focused on game species, sport fish, elk, deer, small game species, sport hunting and angling interests. And that stayed that way for a very long time, really focused on those species and those habitats and those pursuits. As we move forward in time, people became more and more aware of those imperiled species that are out there, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s with the passage of the Endangered Species Act and listing of endangered species at the state level. So really just that idea that there's some of these species that are really critically imperiled, and we need to be focusing a lot of attention on those. And that was a really important step forward. But of course, that's focusing on the most imperiled species. In many ways, you can think about that as we've already lost a lot of the battles to get to that point. If we're to the point that something is on an endangered species list, well, gosh, we probably have failed in some way, and now we're in the emergency room situation. So with that, we've, through time, been trying to have much more of an emphasis on sensitive species, looking at distribution, abundance, population trends, trying to recognize which species might be declining, what threats might be emerging, and trying to address those before we end up in those emergency room situations where we have to be thinking about threatened and endangered species listings. So being more conscious and more proactive, trying to put those things in place beforehand, before we get into critical situations. But again, the agency, for the most part, was doing those things in the context of terrestrial and aquatic vertebrate wildlife species. So again, birds and mammals and fish for the most part. And we did that in a variety of ways. There's some in terms of sort of supporting biodiversity advancements. Back in the late 1990s, CPW introduced Canada lynx, and they still persist in the state. We still have monitoring programs doing research on that species. In the early 2000s, we started restoring black-footed ferrets in Colorado. I was just, with a few other folks that are here in the room, I was out on a release down in southeastern Colorado just last Thursday, releasing black-footed ferrets onto a property down there. So really exciting to see that species being restored to the landscape. Of course, last year we started restoration of gray wolves in Colorado. That continues. That will be moving forward for the next several years, so bringing that species back. And then with passage of Senate Bill 171 last session, we now have authority to reintroduce wolverines, and we're working on some planning actions there and some regulatory pieces, but in the near future, hopeful that we'll be bringing wolverine back to Colorado to restore that species. So really putting some of those native elements back into our landscape. But of course, we think about some of the other things we're interested in, and we think about plants, and you think about the relatively small world of 960 species of vertebrates in the state of Colorado, and you start thinking about plants and the many thousands of plants that are out there. And so it's a much, much larger universe, and we're just starting to get into that formally, but we've been informally working on rare plants for quite a while. We have our own properties, we have state parks, we have state wildlife areas, we have rare plants and federally listed species that occur on those properties. So we're doing management actions to benefit those species. We have our natural areas program. I know Raquel and some of our other natural areas staff are back there. That natural areas program has a large focus on rare plants and rare plant communities, recognizing places in the state of Colorado where those exist, and working with landowners and land managers to benefit those rare plant communities. And then we think about invertebrates, and the universe is even larger. So many species. And so, just to take on the daunting task of like having some authority now to manage invertebrates. When we first started talking about this, they said, well, we want you to think about managing invertebrates. And I'm like, are you sure? Do you know what that means? That's a lot of species. And so, yeah, it is a daunting task, but super exciting. So it's really great to have support and energy and resources now to focus on those species. So, and again, even in, with rare plants and invertebrates, some of those are federally listed, endangered species, state listed species, and many of them are sensitive species. So really focusing on those where we need to take those conservation actions sooner rather than later. So just a quick mention of some of the legislative actions, which we've already talked some about today. We had Senate Bill 22-199 in 2022, and this resulted in the Colorado Native Pollinating Insects Health Study, which we've heard so much about. Yes, round of applause. Yeah, and many of the authors that you see associated with this are here in the room. Just generally, I know many of you are familiar with this, and if you're not, I would encourage you to take a look at it. Like Adrian suggested earlier, there's a lot of great information in there, but some general priorities that were outlined, protecting pollinating insects and protecting and restoring and connecting their habitats, mitigating negative impacts to those species, reducing pesticide risks, and importantly, monitoring and supporting pollinator health. This is a group of species that we don't know a lot about. There's still a lot to learn, even just basic ecology, so putting some focus there. And passage of that bill in 22 led us to this important step forward here, House Bill 241117. And this gives CPW statutory authority to study and conserve invertebrates and rare plants. And again, for the longest time, we only had statutory authority to really manage those vertebrate species as well as mollusks and crustaceans, which we don't put a lot of effort into, at least currently. But so this really expands our authority greatly. And so it allows us to invest in conservation actions for these species. Importantly, what it doesn't do, though, is doesn't give us regulatory authority for those taxonomic groups. So for other species, we can issue permits. We might have fines for certain actions that take place. Scientific collection when we would regulate. We could list species on our threatened and endangered species state list. For plants and invertebrates, we don't have the authority to go that far, to do that regulatory piece. But we can do all of the other things that we do. We can invest resources. We can hire staff specifically to do this. We can, acquire grants. We can give grants. We can use all of our other programs. I see Kim from our real estate group out here. So, we can do real estate actions to benefit those species. So it really broadly expands all of the things that we as an agency can do. So I just wanted to talk just kind of conceptually about implementing biodiversity conservation within CPW. Now we've got this increased authority. That's great. But what are we going to do now that we move forward? How do we go about actually doing some meaningful actions? And one of those things is to plan wisely. We can't just jump in and do everything all at once. So how do we consciously think about creating wise plans to lead us forward? And one of those things that we're working on is our State Wildlife Action Plan and the 2025 revision of that. Kacie's going to give us a lot more information about that here in just a few minutes. But that's not the only thing we do to plan. We have lots of other planning initiatives that are going on right now. We have a habitat conservation and connectivity plan that's wrapping up right now. There's the Colorado Outdoor Strategy. There's our comprehensive outdoor recreation plan. All of these things to address that multifaceted mission that the agency has, both on perpetuating wildlife resources and on providing state parks and sustainable outdoor recreation. So, and we want to make sure that we're linking all of these things together so those things don't work at cross purposes. We also want to be thoughtful about identifying actionable priorities. And by that, we want to avoid random acts of conservation. There's so much that can be done, and sometimes it's easy to just jump in and think we as an agency could do it all and just start trying to sort of, in a scattered manner, trying to do all of those things. And many of those small actions can be very impactful, but unfocused actions may not be the most effective, especially when you're working with limited resources. You want to deploy those resources wisely. So we're looking at using processes like structured decision making and working with some experts there to help lead us to the best decisions and how to deploy our resources in a wise way. And just keeping an open attitude about experimentation and adaptation, especially as we move into this new world of invertebrate and rare plant conservation. It's new to us. We're probably going to make some missteps. That's okay. We're going to learn from that and move forward from those and make better decisions as we do go forward. We also want to think about deploying resources effectively. We've got a lot of resources, and we want to make sure that we use those wisely. And some of those are our new CPW staff. These are all positions that have been hired within the past year or will be hired in the very near future. We just brought Haley as our invertebrate and rare plant program supervisor on last week. Haley's going to be helping us lead recruitment of a pollinator coordinator, a rare plant coordinator, and 2 field biologists to support that program. So if any of you might be interested or know someone that might be interested in those positions, seek Haley or myself out later. We also have a new vertebrate program supervisor leading many of our more traditional species conservation efforts, but we're hiring a forest carnivore coordinator and a regulatory liaison really to focus on wolverine reintroduction and some other regulatory priorities that are going on out there. Kacie, our State Wildlife Action Plan coordinator, it's the first time we've had a dedicated person to lead that effort. She's been on just over a year now. We just hired a data manager who's starting in January to help us keep track of all this new information we're getting. And that's just within my work unit. Throughout the agency, we've got many other positions. We've hired new habitat biologists. We'll be hiring a new aquatic invertebrate coordinator. We have an amphibian coordinator who just got hired last week. We have a climate resiliency policy lead, really to help us look agency-wide to think about climate resiliency and how we should be adapting our programs moving forward. We have our resource stewardship community science coordinator. Donovan's in the room here. He's really new to our efforts. We have new land use coordinators, and we're hiring a statewide energy lead. So again, these are all new positions within the past year. So, huge investment in new personnel focused on biodiversity. And then, of course, we have all of our existing staff that are out there to help support this broad mission as well. We have nearly 1,000 employees statewide supporting the agency, biologists and habitat coordinators, land use, parks, biometricians, policy planning, education, all of those different programs are out there and will be helping us to think about all of these things more broadly. We have funding that comes into our agency, through Great Outdoors Colorado, our game cache, General Assembly funds, federal grants, Keep Colorado, Wild Pass, many different funding sources coming into our agency, and that helps us to access grants, and it also helps us to have external granting programs like through our real estate RFP program that happens annually, through our wetlands program, opportunities like that to help support partners in these efforts as well. We also want to develop synergistic partnerships, and I see all of you here in the room, and we want to connect more meaningfully with so many of you. Again, I mentioned many of our programs within CPW that we'll be working with to think about these biodiversity more broadly. We also have within other state government, we have the State Land Board. I see Mindy and Lindsay are out there, and they are moving into a biodiversity program with the State Land Board, the Energy and Carbon Management Commission, focusing through their rulemaking on being more thoughtful about cumulative impacts, including rare plants and pollinators in some of their work. So lots of opportunities there. I saw Nicole, the governor's office is here. Great to have you here, Nicole. Federal government as well. We see the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service recently stood up the Center for Pollinator Conservation. That's a nationwide program. We've had other people mention NRCS, FSA, Farm Bill programs. Those are opportunities. The Bureau of Land Management is conducting site assessments statewide for both pollinators and rare plants. So that's really exciting. Lots of great opportunities for all of us to connect there. Universities, I just put CU and CSU on there, but there's many others, and the the outreach opportunities that they have, the science that they have, those are great for us to interact with. We have all the NGOs and interested stakeholders out there. Again, I just put 4 on here, but there's hundreds more. We've seen many of those represented today, but working collaboratively across all of these different resources that we have out there. And then thinking not just within the state of Colorado, but thinking regionally, nationally, and even internationally about conservation programs. I just mentioned the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies here. This is a group of states across the western United States that we collaborate with. They have a Western monarch and native insect working group that has been active for the past couple of years. So just a great opportunity for us to connect with state partners across the Western United States. And that group is looking at creating a Western bumblebee conservation plan. So again, thinking about being more proactive and not waiting until species are on an endangered species list. And then lastly, monitoring, evaluating, and adapting. Again, keeping track of what we are doing and adapting when we need to. Again, many programs out there with monitoring going on already through Xerces, Butterfly Pavilion. David's going to tell us about the Biodiversity Heritage Survey that the Heritage Program is leading. So lots of exciting opportunities there and many more that I'm not mentioning here. Identifying information gaps where they do exist through our State Wildlife Action Plan. We're looking at identifying species of greatest information need, species that we think there's conservation concern about, but maybe we don't quite know or we don't quite know what we need to do yet. So gathering that information so we can be effective when we move forward. And also within CPW, I've been thinking about co-benefits of other programs and how we can adapt and modify those. We have a habitat program that's out there doing a lot of good work. What additional things might they do to benefit pollinators? We have, our Corners for Conservation, which nominally is out there to really support bird populations in large part, but, birds eat bugs and bugs are what we're talking about. So, how do we get co-benefit to benefit pollinators and all those other things that are in these food webs? Wet meadow restoration we're doing for sage grouse species. So super exciting. Are there co-benefits there? Are there ways we can modify and adapt some of those programs to have additional benefits? That's just a few little mentions there. There's many, many more things out there we can be thinking about. So again, CPW's had a very long progression, again, over 125 years of moving towards more comprehensive biodiversity conservation. But recent changes, both legislative and, with many partners and other opportunities that are out there, we've had very, very rapid progress over the past couple of years. And we need to be intentional about the ways that we engage in biodiversity conservation. So invest those resources that we've been given wisely. And then think about ongoing collaboration with diverse partners. We've got many, many more resources than we had before, but it's certainly not enough to do all of the work that we all need to do together. And with that, I thank you. And we'll be around as the panel to take questions later. And thank you once again.
I think Kacie can come up. I think it's Haley. Oh, hey. Oh, Haley.
I just have a couple words. So.
Sure,
Okay,
come on.
Get out of your way quick.
I'll just leave this up.
Yeah, that's really fine.
Hello. Yeah, I just mostly want to introduce myself. I'm Haley Schroder. So I'm the new invertebrate and rare plant program supervisor. I started on Tuesday, so this is day 5. So I'll just say a couple things. And so while this program is super new and my position are super new within CPW, obviously this work has been going on for a long time in Colorado. My background is in understanding anthropogenic effects on invertebrates broadly, including climate change, disease, invasive species, habitat loss. And sort of at the center of all this is that there's no invertebrate that experiences any one of these stressors in isolation. And so we really need solutions that consider the context that these stressors are being experienced. And sort of a big way that I see us doing this is through collaboration, leveraging each other's monitoring and programming to amplify and uplift each other's work. And so in being here today, I want to be a sponge. If I don't track you down to talk to you, please come find me or talk to me or send me an email. As we're building out this program, knowing what you guys are doing and how we can all work together will be instrumental. So I look forward to talking to you guys now or later, and I'm just so excited to be here. So.
Right, that look right?
Okay, thanks. All right. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Good to see you all. I'm really happy to be here and have a chance to talk about the SWAP, the State Wildlife Action Plan, with you. As Dave mentioned, I've been in the job just about a year, and most fun is hearing from you all about what you think about the SWAP and what should be in it, or what it should look like, or just all the thoughts that everyone's been sharing with me has been really great. And if you have never heard of the SWAP, that is okay, because you're going to learn just a little bit today, and I'm always happy to tell you more later. So about 25 years ago, the State and Tribal Wildlife Grants Program began through Congress, and it's for a broad array of fish and wildlife. And it comes from funds that Congress does have to appropriate every year, and it's federal grants then to the states based on the state's size and population. But to be eligible for these funds, you have to have an updated SWAP every 10 years. There's been 8 required elements throughout this whole time period. Every time you've done a SWAP, you have to have these 8 elements. The first might be what you've heard of before in the species list, the species of greatest conservation need. That's the foundation of the SWAP. And then from there, we identify the location and condition of habitats that are essential for those species, what problems and threats might be impacting both the species and their habitats, the actions that we're going to take to conserve the species and their habitats, that we're going to talk about monitoring and how we're going to see what we've been doing over the 10 years. We have to review the plan every 10 years. And then the final 2 elements are all about you all and how do we coordinate and develop and revise the plan with our partners and the public, and also how do we implement the plan. So right now we're working on developing our plan. It is due in September of 2025, so we have just under a year left, but then we have 10 years to implement it and work with you all on all of that. And so the history of the SWAP in Colorado mirrors what's happened across the country. So you may have heard of other states that started off in the early 2000s with comprehensive wildlife strategies. That's what they were called then. And then we had our first revision in 2015, and now we're working on our 2025 SWAP. And every time we do it, we want to make it better. We want to make it more applicable and more useful for everyone. And so in starting off the planning process at the beginning of this year, we are really thinking about what's our guiding philosophy here in the planning process. We don't want to just get through the planning and then have a plan and try and do it, right? We have to think about what does that process provide us opportunities to do. And one big one is raising awareness. So making sure that you all hear about it, making sure that we understand it more and what we're going to be doing so that as we move through the planning, we're ready for implementation because more people know about it. And so then bridging the implementation gap between planning and doing. We want to be thinking about that the whole time. And equity in process. Maybe talking to people who are closest to solutions, talking to people that haven't been involved in the SWAP before. So a lot of you all, because we're thinking about plants and invertebrates more meaningfully now, that means talking with you all maybe differently than we had in the past. And transparency. This is a big government agency planning process, and that can look a little funny to people. They may not quite understand it or think that they're interested in it, even though I think planning's wonderful. Not everybody understands that. So we do want to be clear about what we're doing as we do it. And we've had really good feedback that people can see what we're doing as we move through this year, and that feels really good. We want to make each of those elements more robust, and we're doing that by more meaningful inclusion of invertebrates and plants this time, meaning they won't just be appendices, they will be ingrained in with the vertebrates throughout the plan. And we want to be talking more about emerging threats like climate change. We want to complement and leverage other conservation planning initiatives. We've heard about some today. I'm sure a lot of you are involved in a lot of different things, and we want to make sure that they're talking with each other and that we're complementing each other's resources. And then we're thinking about implementation-friendly products. How do we build community around this plan? What kind of digital products can we have? Last time we had an 800-page PDF that you can download from the website. This time we want to think about something that's a little bit more useful in 2025, thinking through 2034. And so for historic context, we didn't have as much funding and staff. Dave just walked you through how we've grown over time, that my position didn't exist. There wasn't as much funding. And now we have a lot of that, which is great. A little bit of a lack of awareness, both internally and externally, of the plan. It was sometimes seen more of a state of affairs rather than a planning document. Here's how things are today as we write this versus what are we going to go do. And there's just a long list of ideas, lots of species, lots of threats, lots of actions, all the things, but it was harder to take that and actually move into implementation. But a lot of our staff and partners do use it to guide their work, and they cite it for grants. They rank projects based on this, and they say that its value is very important, especially that list of species, and it is considered a critical resource. So moving forward, we do want to retain that the SWAP is the authority on species of greatest conservation need in Colorado, that is a place for collective action where we can come together through coordination and partnerships. And we do want to make sure that our work stays adaptive, right? There's emerging threats like white nose syndrome or new species of concern or new information that comes out. Not everything that's in the SWAP is all that we're going to work on. We're going to have, all of us will have lots of priorities, kind of adjacent to and around the SWAP as we move through the next decade. And we do want to focus on those species that have lacked historic support and program focus in the past. This is a place to start to elevate those. But what do we want to change as we move into this new SWAP? We want to elevate it in CPW programs, as Dave has already mentioned. We have this new forming group and this bigger coalition of people within our agency. And so this is going to be a guiding document to bring together folks from different segments in CPW, and also as a call to action outside of the agency to everybody. Increasing relevancy to more people by building those more robust elements, having folks be able to see their work in this plan a little more. Make it a more proactive planning document so it's more specific, more actionable, and it moves from that SWAP represents our work to it drives our work. And Dave mentioned we're going to start identifying species of greatest information need. This is something new that we've had a really positive response to. It's a subset of species of greatest conservation need, so there's no difference in importance there. It's just we're not quite sure what's going on with these species, and we need some more scientific knowledge to fully evaluate the conservation status. And we want to be able to close the gap about these species by identifying the appropriate questions that need understanding to know the conservation status. And so just quickly, as we move through this year, we did work a lot on our vertebrate and plant species of greatest conservation need, thinking about whether or not they had Endangered Species Act status, whether they're vulnerable in Colorado. This was a big part of we had a very robust scoring process that we went through, thinking about abundance, distribution, and trend. Is the species vulnerable? Are we worried about it winking out in Colorado? The ecological role of Colorado for the species, so it is a state plan for our state, so we're thinking about not CPW's role or what CPW is going to do, but how much does this species rely on the state of Colorado? So something like Gunnison sage-grouse is endemic to Colorado. If we don't do something, we're going to lose that species, right? Something like the whooping crane is an important species, it's listed, but it only rarely shows up in Colorado. We're not going to be taking a lot of action for that species. So just thinking through the role of the states as we think through which species are we going to take action on. We wanted to be sure we were thinking about any severe and specific threats coming up. There's the death by 1,000 cuts question, there's habitat loss, there's climate change, there's all these things that all of the species in the state are facing. But really, if something is coming and we want to make sure we're paying attention to it, we took that into account. So I mentioned white nose syndrome before. Some of our bats are doing okay right now, but white nose has been documented in the state. And what is the impact of that in the coming years going to be? And so we elevated bats in the SWAP to make sure we're paying attention to those really big threats. And then lack of scientific knowledge, not necessarily a threat so much, but the biggest issue for the species of greatest information need, is there unknown or low confidence in our vulnerability factors as we went through scoring and we said, I think, maybe, I'm not sure. Then we paid attention to that and we made sure to elevate those in greatest information need. Or is there some taxonomic uncertainty or poorly understood life history or response to threats? And so these were the criteria we used to come up with our species list. And then as far as invertebrate species of greatest need goes, as you've heard, Haley just started and she's going to be filling out her team. And so we're waiting to get all of that going. We did recently meet with a bunch of folks in the room to talk about starting to brainstorm how we might approach this big group of species to embrace the idea of an actionable plan, but address the taxonomic impediment that somebody mentioned, where there's so many species. So how do we have some sideboards and thinking about maybe a potential hybrid approach where we highlight some individual species, but we also think about maybe some indicator species to represent larger groups. So coming soon, how are we going to handle invertebrates in the SWAP? And we'll definitely want your thoughts on that. And then this is just a draft of a dashboard that we put together with our data manager as we went through the process with the vertebrates. So when I talk about digital products, here's your first visual, your first digital product that we developed, where you can go in and you can see how we ranked each of the vertebrate species, even the ones that are not on the list. You can read about how come they didn't make the list. So we're kind of having this permanent record of how that list got developed. So in the coming years, we can go back and look and see what we've learned and see what's changed. So we're pretty excited about that. And I know many of you went in. We just had a public comment period. I see lots of faces in the room of comments that we got from you all on the draft list and this dashboard. So thank you for participating in that. And then I'll just end with, we are going to have more opportunities for engagement. If you haven't seen it, CPW's public engagement site is called Engage CPW, so engagecpw.org. You can go there and look at anything that CPW is working on right now, or we're taking public comment, or we recently took public comment, and see what's up. If you use that QR code, it'll take you to a Google form, and I'll get your name and email. So the next time we have an opportunity with SWAP specifically, I'll just email you and let you know. If you've commented before, you'll automatically get an email that there's something new in Engage. And it's also just a place to go and look at what's going on with the State Wildlife Action Plan. Even if we don't have an open comment period, we're going to keep posting information there of the species list and a link to the dashboard and all that. So that's the place to go to keep up to date with the SWAP. And that is all I had. So I am going to now, I think, turn it back over so we can switch to Dave Anderson. Thank you.
Bottom one fastest.
Bottom one.
Yep, and you can use that, or you can turn that off.
Okay, sweet. Do I have to turn that off? Turn this on? Right. Well, thanks, Dave, Kacie, and Haley, and Adrian. Really, really glad to be here. This is a very exciting crowd to bring some great updates to about our program. So I'm going to talk about the Colorado Natural Heritage Program and the Statewide Natural Heritage Survey. Our program is has kind of a double identity. We are housed at and part of, we're a non-academic department at the Warner College, at Warner College of Natural Resources at Colorado State University. So that's our institutional home. And we're also, as part of CSU, we're also the constituent member of the NatureServe Network for Colorado. So the NatureServe Network is a global biodiversity conservation science collaborative that's united by a nonprofit called NatureServe. So as the constituent member for Colorado, we curate the data for Colorado that feeds into a global biodiversity database that's curated by NatureServe. So, and as a heritage program, we and all of the other heritage programs across the country, there's one in every state and there's one in every Canadian province, ask the same questions. We focus on what species and ecosystems we have in Colorado, and of those, which ones are at risk or otherwise significant. Which ones do we really need to be paying attention to? Where are those ones that we need to pay attention to found? How are they doing at each of those locations? And looking at the larger scale, kind of what is a strategic set of landscapes where we can have the greatest impact on biodiversity conservation? And we focus our work across all of these different taxonomic groups. It's a rather tall order. Thankfully, we have a great many partners that we work with to accomplish this task of answering all of these questions. And the folks in this room are super important partners for us, certainly where invertebrates are concerned. So the way that it works for us is that we assign a conservation status rank to everything that we have in the state and use those empirical data to figure out which ones we're most worried about. And those are the things that are ranked 1, 2, and 3 on these two scales. A global rank is assigned to every species and plant community based on how rare it is globally. The same rank gets applied to something just within Colorado.
So something that's ranked 1 is critically imperiled. Within Colorado, that would mean if something is ranked S1, that means that it's known from about 5 or fewer occurrences in the world. So we assign these ranks based purely on empirical data and keep them separate from politics and other priorities. And because of that, these data are very useful for all sorts of planners and managers and practitioners to help get the work on the ground where it needs to get done and on the species that we need to try to save. So we put all of our information into a new mapping and reporting tool called Codex, which we host collaboratively with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. This tool is free. You can go into it and set up your own account. Within that, you can keep track of the requests and the landscapes that you're most interested in. It'll remember all the reports that you submit, so you can curate a little stash of reports for places that you're interested in working on. We have data from over 30 different partners within Codex. You can layer those data on top of each other, kind of play with them on the map and look at things. What I'm showing here are the element occurrence records for Colorado at a coarse scale. So that's kind of, I wanted to give you a foundation of what our program does so that you kind of know what we're all about. I mean, the work that we do is in the service of you. We don't exist at all for any reason besides partnerships and supporting management and conservation decisions. We don't protect any land. We don't have any regulatory authority. We're just here because we have the empirical data to support the decisions and the partnerships that you are a part of. So those include the work of Colorado Parks and Wildlife, supporting massive efforts like the SWAP, all of their land acquisition and management decisions. Same for our federal agencies. Many of our other state agencies depend on these data as well. And folks, in the Colorado Pollinators Network can use these data. So I'm here to, after introducing you to my program, talk about the Colorado Statewide Natural Heritage Survey. I'm remembering right now a couple of things I forgot to share with you. One is that we have a staff of about 50 people now. We've grown quite a bit over the last couple of years with lots of soft funding inputs. Our program is 100% soft funded. So we operate entirely on grants and agreements and donations. So the biggest grant we've ever gotten just came in. This was awarded by GOCO and many other funding partners as well, who you see here. This project is called the Statewide Natural Heritage Survey. And this is a massive effort across many partners to level up the biodiversity conservation data for the entire state of Colorado. This work is going to support conservation at all scales across Colorado's communities. It will be done to support efforts like the SWAP and provide those foundational data layers that Kacie just talked about in the early stages of the SWAP, as well as management acquisitions across all the spectrum of land managers across Colorado. It's also going to support actions within Colorado's communities at the ground level. And I'll explain a little bit about that. I'm going to say, I think I forgot to put in a slide. I wanted to introduce my two new entomology staff. That's Tristan and Nathan. Would you guys mind standing up? It is so exciting to have entomologists on staff now. Tristan Kubik has worked with us for many years, first as a volunteer and an intern. Now he's on our staff. He was just out on adventures where he discovered a Nivian crane fly that heretofore has not even been known from North America. So it's amazing. Once you get started looking for these things, what you'll find when you have someone with the expertise to find them and understand them. It's kind of amazing. And Nathan comes to us from the John Mola Bee Lab, and I think many of you know these guys from past work, so wanted to be sure that they got a proper introduction here for this crowd. And it's the statewide natural heritage surveys funding that has allowed us to increase our staff capacity with them and many others. So on we go. So this project was inspired in kind of a foundational recognition of the inequity across Colorado's counties and the completeness and access to conservation data. These data support decisions that are major economic drivers in Colorado. And so this map shows the counties where CNHP has been funded to conduct countywide biological surveys. And it also roughly reflects kind of the level of survey effort of the biodiversity of Colorado as you see it in natural history collections, and iNaturalist, as you saw with Adrian's introduction today, and eBird. Kind of the effort that's been put on the ground in Colorado is, there is not equity across that effort. That is a problem that leaves some counties disempowered to make solid decisions on recreation and conservation. So as you may know, Colorado is really lucky. We have this new effort called the Outdoor Regional Partnership Initiative that has funded counties to get themselves organized into these collaboratives wherein they're going to plan conservation and recreation sustainably into the future. You can imagine that when one county within one of these collaboratives has really good data and another county has lousy data, it's going to make it kind of hard for them to come together at the table. And when we're collaboratively, so we're endeavoring to lower those barriers for them with this project. So you'll note that these counties are aligned with 7 of these different outdoor regional partnerships that have already become established. In 2025, our fieldwork is going to focus on these 19 counties. So if you live there or like to go on adventures there, we've got some work for you to help us out with if you want. We're really excited about this geography. It's going to be quite a roadmap for adventures this coming summer. Whoopsie, what's happening? Okay. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. Oh, wait, there's my slide for these guys. Okay, whoops. It wasn't where I thought it was going to be. Okay, so here's their emails. Email them and become friends with them. So this project is way too big for us to do by ourselves. In order to pull this off, we need to form partnerships across many different efforts that are taking place. This first one is a study of pollinator diversity that's being led by Bird Conservancy of the Rockies with FSA funding to study the invertebrates of CRP land. Nathan was hired with funds that came to us to do that, so we're going to be working on insects collected as part of that work. We're engaging with Colorado's tribes. A major part of this project is to bring the traditional ecological knowledges into focus across all of Colorado's tribes, not just the ones that have tribal lands, but all of them that have some connection to Colorado, of which there are about 48. So we'll see how far we can get with that as part of this project over the next 5 years while we're funded to do it. Another one that's profoundly impactful so far is to engage with the iNaturalist community. So that discovery I was just telling you about that Tristan made has been assisted and verified by experts on iNaturalist. So if you are using iNaturalist, we can ingest those data into our database and raise all the boats in the harbor with your effort. So please use iNaturalist. It's awesome. If you use it enough, we're going to reach out to you and try to get you more involved in specifically this project. Some of you might have already had that experience with us. Another thing we've got a little bit of funding to do is to kind of bring these two volunteer programs together. The Adopt a Rare Plant program has been jointly kind of managed with a very tiny amounts of resources by us, Colorado Native Plant Society and the Denver Botanic Gardens. We're hoping to, we're forming plans to bring that together with the Native Bee Watch program that's managed by Lisa Mason, from whom you're going to hear later on today. We're very excited to sort of figure out how we can turbocharge this massive population of volunteers and citizen scientists to collect better data on rare bees and rare plants. You can hit this QR code for other information about how to get involved in the statewide Natural Heritage Survey. There's not very much there yet, but as we go through this winter, we're going to put the resources up there where you can connect. And so that's all that I had for you. I wanted to part into our panel just saying that this is a super exciting time for conservation in Colorado. We've got this growing program at CPW. We're going to have the most awesome swap that we've ever had in 2025. It's led by Kacie, and we have such great leadership, new bills that have been passed to really turbocharge conservation in Colorado. This statewide Natural Heritage Survey is going to be happening to support all of that work. And I'm really excited to get to know you all better and do the good work. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Anything, I guess. This is fine.
I'll just leave that.
So be thinking of your questions and comments for discussion and send those up. I'll get these folks a chance to settle in. And I think, there's some mics there for you. And while the questions are filtering in, I just thought I'd start with something very broad for you all. Just thinking about what a biodiverse state of Colorado would look like in possibly 3, 5, 10 years. Any thoughts on that? What are the challenges? Just some perspectives on what you're thinking about. It's an exciting time for change in Colorado and movement forward. So that goes to anyone who'd like to take it.
Yeah, thanks, Joyce. I'll take a quick stab just from the context of CPW. I think it's really exciting to think 3 or 5 or 10 years in the future. And we've got some, all these new resources. We have the State Wildlife Action Plan to lead us. One challenge, though, I see is like, how do we ingrain all of these new programs and this broader mission across the agency? We have all, nearly 1,000 employees out there. They were all doing full-time work before. They were all doing many things. So, how do we ingrain this broader thinking into all aspects of our agency and not have it fall on the shoulders of Haley and her crew or just a handful of us? So how do we work even just within our own walls within the agency to embed that in all of our programs?
That's great. Anybody else want to add to that? Okay. And thank you all just for making your presentation so partnership oriented. I mean, you obviously are aware of this community here, and I think that's so wonderful that your agencies are so open to that input. So really appreciate that. Now we have some questions coming in here. How does federal funding and the EPA impact the SWAP and CPW, or the CPW staff and the Natural Heritage Program?
I can speak to it from CPW's standpoint. CPW has access to a lot of federal funding through a variety of different mechanisms, and that come into our agency, and we can use that to support our programs. Not so much EPA funding coming into the agency, but through U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is one of our big funders through things like Section 6 grants under the ESA, the state wildlife grants that come in as part of our the State Wildlife Action Plan and that requirement that we have there. So, there's a variety of different federal funding that comes in from Fish and Wildlife Service, and that helps us to support our programs. So some of those things must necessarily be focused on threatened and endangered species, but certainly not all of them. There's lots of other federal partners we work with out there as well, like NRCS and FSA on Farm Bill programs. We leverage a lot of those resources to work with private landowners to put programs in place that benefit wildlife and biodiversity in Colorado. We work a lot with the federal land management agencies, the Forest Service, the BLM, the National Park Service, collaboratively on programs. So there's just a lot of different connections with federal programs out there, and we try to leverage those, use those wisely. We as a state agency, a lot of those oftentimes come with strings that you must bring non-federal match to access federal funding. So we as a state agency can oftentimes bring that non-federal match and allow us to leverage those resources.
Thank you. Excellent. You'll give us a 5-minute, Steve, please. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's a really good question. The federal funding is hugely important for our program. We've, for many years, received EPA wetland program funding to manage data on Colorado's wetlands and sample those wetlands and provide data to federal partners on those. And we have data sharing partnerships going with Forest Service, BLM, NRCS, to provide them with complete data sets for Colorado on which they can base decisions on land management, on what their sensitive species of various flavors lists are going to consist of. So.
Thanks, Dave. What would be the most effective way for local municipalities to engage with the state? And then, I mixed up the questions, but we'll go with that one to start.
Sure, thank you. We have had a couple of county open space programs and city comment on the SWAP and the species list and how they might use that information in their own conservation planning in their organizations, or offer up, data that they have on the trends they've seen on their own lands. And so participating in the comment process on the SWAP, or coming soon, maybe some more opportunities outside of just Engage CPW. We're trying to get out some more in-person opportunities to hear from folks. So we would love to have local municipalities participate and then use the SWAP. Just thinking through some of the comments we've heard and thinking about implementation of the SWAP and into the next 3 to 5 years, how do we come together as a conservation community around these species? And so we're trying to think about the digital tools, community of practice. What is this going to look like? So we would very much be interested in how local groups could use that.
A couple more for you, Kacie. Are all counties included in the SWAP, or?
Yes, it is a statewide plan.
Okay, cool. And do you take invasive species in consideration? Is there some acknowledgement of that and worked into the plan?
If I missed the question, someone come find me after. But we started off with the vertebrate list, at least, and thinking about the potential list of species to consider. And we started with those that are native to the state and then started winnowing down from there. But I think invasive species, as far as if you're thinking about as a threat or actions or how to talk about them, then those are the pieces yet to come. And we're thinking about what do we need to be doing for the native species of Colorado, or what are actions that we want people to take or not take moving forward.
Great, thanks.
And on that note, now we track 168 species of invertebrates. That list is growing massively right now. And what's super exciting about the SWAP is that the SGIN are basically a roadmap for us with the statewide natural heritage survey of what we know we need more information about to get out and look for.
Dave Anderson, this is for you. What do you think about native plant gardens growing rare plants? Is that a good way to conserve species?
I don't know. I'm a little conflicted about that. I have Enothera coloradensis in my yard because it was for sale at the plant sale at the Spring Creek Gardens this spring. And it was like, well, I'm just going to see what happens. I think they have tremendous potential to raise people's awareness of our native flora. And get people involved more with conservation. I worry a little bit about, dilution of native populations, genetics, or other issues like that are things that I think we have to think about with the sale of these plants.
Thank you. I think this has been answered, but favorite insect ID app for Colorado? Do you have others beyond iNaturalist? We talk a lot about iNaturalist, but
I'm here to learn that from you all. I've really enjoyed learning more about identifying native insect pollinators, and it's not something I'm an expert at. So I'm eager to see the resource room downstairs, see what's down there.
Can I just ask Tristan and Nathan what their favorite insect ID apps are?
They don't really exist yet. We're both just saying the technology is not there. Even with AI, you still need a fundamental understanding of insect characters. And it's just wonderful to walk through a taxonomic tree if you haven't ever done so. I might throw one thing out there in response to that too, which is iNaturalist is awesome for things that have had pictures taken of it. Remember how many species of bees I had on the intro? 204 as of now. How many are in Colorado? 1,008 now. We added 2 more last year. Thanks, Virginia, wherever you're at. So, what you really need is training from specialists and people who are already out in the field surveying to show you what to even take pictures of. Because if you don't recognize the difference, you don't know to take a picture and upload it in the first place. So every tool can be refined and made better.
Is this on? Okay.
Yeah.
The one I would just add is bee machine, which it's a similar thing though, that if it's highly recognizable species that maybe you would be able to identify and learn anyway. So
can you repeat it?
bee machine.
Bee machine.
So that's another one to throw out there.
Haley, any thoughts on the department you're building? Anything you'd like to comment on that in terms of your vision?
Yeah, I think like a major challenge, we already have some money for our first year of this program, but we're really building it. So I think to build momentum, collaborations, I kind of said this when I introduced myself, will be a huge way for us to sort of get our program moving. So ways there are already infrastructure that you are doing in your program that we can help support will be a really nice avenue for us to get the program up and running as we're developing our own programming. Getting our staff on board will increase capacity a lot as well.
That's great. This is kind of follow up on municipalities, ways that we might motivate cities to create and protect habitat for invertebrates. Any thoughts on that? Obviously, we have people from all sectors here, and trying to share that with other levels of government is so important.
Yeah, I don't have anything profound. Again, I think there's a lot of opportunity for some co-learning here with all of you in this room. When I think about just the conservation of pollinator species and the scale at which those act, a lot of the species that we've more traditionally dealt with in Colorado Parks and Wildlife are species that require massive landscapes. They're large vertebrate species. They need tens of thousands of acres, and maybe that's not true for all pollinators. Maybe there's opportunities for some. I'm sure there are some that do require those very, very large landscapes, but maybe there are opportunities we can look at to get some of those wins in places where we have smaller scale habitats.
I assume you're collaborating with Department of Ag, but the question is plans to engage with CDA in the swap, other pollinator conservation efforts in general.
CDA we work with them frequently on lots of different programs, and private lands make up easily at least half of Colorado. We have kind of known as a public land state, what people think of stereotypically about Colorado, but gosh, you look in the eastern half of the state, and many places in western Colorado as well. We're working on private lands, and many of those are agricultural lands. So lots of opportunities to work with Colorado Department of Agriculture, USDA, Farm Service agencies, NRCS, all of those programs, and to build on the private lands programs we have now. We have many private lands programs out there, both positions funded within CPW and working with partner organizations out there to provide support, to provide technical assistance, to provide resources to private landowners to help advance biodiversity conservation.
Okay, I think we have time for just one or two more, and this is this is a big one. What are the variables that are considered in order to decide what species to reintroduce? Example, wolverine.
Oh gosh, that's a tough one. Part of it is motivated by need. We want to restore species that are native to Colorado. If you look historically, Canada lynx were one where we had motivation, and this was 25 plus years ago. We were looking at both wolverine and Canada lynx and deciding what to move forward, and a decision was made to focus on Canada lynx at that time. Part of it's being able to put the regulatory framework in place and get past some oftentimes Endangered Species Act barriers that are problematic. We need a lot of agreements, a lot of permits, just the right political environment sometime to move forward on those things. I wouldn't say there's a recipe for, just deciding you're going to do it one day and then going ahead and doing it the next. It sometimes takes literally years or decades of motivation to move forward on some of those. So, but it's been exciting to see those moving forward. The wolverine thing we've been talking about this for years, and it's been a lot of work. The wolves, we just reintroduced last year, but we worked on that for years prior to that. Black-footed ferrets obviously were thought to be extinct at one point, so it's really rewarding to see those restored to the landscape.
Kacie, is there a tracking mechanism for the swap where there are live updates to any degree over those 10 years, or is it just remain the same until the next update?
We would like to have a place where we're tracking what we're doing. We're looking at implementation tools and implementation tracking. There was a dashboard developed from the 2015 swap that was really cool and showed by species and by type of action, and you could look and see what was going on. But again, we found that laundry list of things so long that then it was hard to see what was happening. And so we're trying to think about how can we do that in a more meaningful way. I will say it's not prohibitive, but to change the species list in any way, you do have to go back to the Fish and Wildlife Service for approval. And so things like, well, can't you just keep changing the list? We probably won't do that, but we probably will take a look. And if it calls for it, we could do a minor revision and change the list. But really, we're looking for a place, a platform, a community to come together to say, all right, we said we were going to do such and such for Pinyon Jay. That study happened. What did we learn? And so what's next? So making sure that stuff keeps rolling. A lot of work went in this year to coming up with the species list, and if it could be more streamlined, because we've all just been in conversation more over the coming years, I think that people would like to see that happen. So I'm open to ideas. This is why it's really exciting that my position exists. We haven't had a person in the intervening years when it wasn't time to do the plan to work on the implementation side of it. So in 2026, that's the kind of stuff that I'm going to be working really hard on.
Okay, nice. The native pollinating insect study identified pesticides as one of the major threats to pollinators, and so there was a question about any sense of addressing pollen or pesticide threats, specifically neonics, in any of the documents or work you're doing.
Yeah, we're not there yet. We don't have our list of species for the State Wildlife Action Plan for invertebrates yet, but neonics certainly are something that probably will rise up as a threat that we want to think about, and how do we address those? So, as we more meaningfully build conservation programs for rare plants and invertebrates into the State Wildlife Action Plan, identifying all those potential threats and also actionable priorities for things that we can do to address those threats is going to be something we're thinking about.
Okay, thank you so much. And I'm going to let Adrian take it out, but I want to thank this panel so much. They're obviously amazing partners and leaders for our state, and we're so thrilled to be able to work with them. And thank you all so much for being here today. And Adrian has, I think, one more question for you.
So, sorry, I can't help myself, but I thought I would use your last responses to my question to kind of round up our morning sessions, which is thinking back to how I phrased the intro. We live in a time where, unfortunately, everything is politicized, right? And we're living in a heightened state of mistrust in our government, in our academic institutions, in the validity of real data. And so wildlife is based in the concept of public trust doctrine, right? And so I was just curious what each of you thought about the role of pollinators in helping rebuild trust between all the different constituents of which our state serves. And do you have any generalized thoughts? Sorry, that was a big question. Sorry.
Let's see. I think pollinators are such an accessible organism for us to interact with. Like, everybody encounters pollinators. People in their yards. Like, it's just something that is such a universal experience in a way that maybe wolves, that's been a joy for you to deal with the wolf politics, I think. But there's a kind of this collective, like, everyone is excited about pollinators more broadly, except for maybe some fear about being stung. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunities for community science. People are really involved in saving the pollinators, that people can connect to it with their food. And I think, like, CPW has done a good job with the statewide life action plan and communicating data, and a lot of these community science programs as well are very transparent in their data. You can see the record, you can participate in it yourself, and I think that does a huge part where, like, when you're a part of the science, you can kind of believe it a little bit more.
I love that. And what you said made me think about how pollination is inherently a partnership, and that the partnerships we have for conservation are built on trust. And we have a really deep trust among the conservation partners in Colorado. So that is a really good platform on which to do really meaningful work. I need to say a quick thing about the rare plant growing business. No one should dig them up. So no one should go dig up rare plants and sell them, and we just have to be really thoughtful and careful about it. And I don't know, the more I sit here thinking about that, the more complicated an answer feels to that question. So anyway.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add, but yeah, I mean, just looking again at the room here, there's so many people that are engaged in this, and I think we probably all come to it from a very unique point of view, whether you're interested in pollinators themselves, if you're interested in rare plants, or if you're interested in food systems, if you're just interested in having beautiful Colorado landscapes to hike in. All of those things are dependent on pollinators, so, you know, using that as a touch point for all of us to connect, I think, is a way we can move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say you hit on something very near and dear to my heart. The public trust doctrine is why I work for the state wildlife agency. It's why I built my career around that. And I was an environmental educator to use that door to open to a more illiterate citizenry, you know, to engage people in conservation. And so I'm excited at this place and time in my career to be working on something like the SWAP. I don't care if people know SWAP, what it means, that first couple slides I gave, but using it as a place to engage people in conservation through a transparent process, a way to see how you engage, but also this future of the implementation time and how we can use some of these species to as the hook to bring them in. You know, talking to our education staff, talking to our state park staff, how can we have consistent messaging around pollinators and other species so that people just keep hearing the same thing, because we know that messaging is what works, and get people engaged in conservation through it.
Awesome. Excellent answers all around. So thank you all for participating today.